The sun had barely cleared the bamboo grove when Mr. Puck heard footsteps outside his shop. Heavy, unfamiliar. He looked up from his carving bench to find a tall man in a pressed white shirt, shoes caked with red clay. Not a villager. Not from these hills. The stranger stood quietly for a moment, gazing at the rows of wooden doors leaning against the old wall. Each one handmade, each one shaped by stories. "Are you the one they call the door whisperer?" he asked, his Vietnamese tinged with an accent. "Maybe from the city. Maybe from somewhere farther." Mr. Puck chuckled. "I make doors that don't swell in rain, don't groan in the wind. If that counts as whispering, sure." The man stepped closer, his eyes not just curious, but tired. "I need a door," he said, "but not just any door. I need one. That doesn't close." Mr. Puck blinked. "You mean one that swings both ways?" "No," the man said softly. "A door that won't close. Ever." It wasn't a riddle. Not to Mr. Puck. The way the man said it, like a prayer, made his hands still. In this village, doors meant more than privacy. They were the line between past and present, between the ones who left and the ones who stayed. And sometimes they were all we had to say. Come home. If you've ever believed that wood can hold emotion, that a door can mean more than an entrance, then this story will open something in you. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, where every carving speaks. Mr. Puck didn't answer right away. He poured tea instead, motioned for the man to sit. "Tell me," he said, "why you need a door that never shuts." And as the steam rose between them, the man began to speak. Of a house his father built, of a brother who left and never returned, of guilt, silence, and years that had passed like dust through slats of forgotten wood. Mr. Puck listened, not just to words, but to the ache behind them. He looked at the man's hands, shaking slightly, and knew this wasn't just a job. It was an invitation to carve a memory, to build forgiveness, and maybe to leave something open for someone who might still come home. If this moves you, stay with us. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and follow what happens when a craftsman agrees to build the impossible. Mr. Puck stood silently in front of the wide plank of jackfruit wood, golden, aged, with a few dark streaks running through its grain like old scars. He had used it before, for altars, ancestor tables, even coffins, but never for a door, especially not one that was never meant to close. He ran his hand over its surface. It felt warm, like it had already lived a life. Behind him, the stranger lingered by the window, watching but saying nothing. Mr. Puck turned slightly, asking, how wide was the frame? The man hesitated, then whispered, "He never came back through it, so I don't know." That's when Mr. Puck understood. This door was for a ghost, a brother, or maybe a part of himself. He didn't ask more. Sometimes wood revealed what silence couldn't. And in this craft, not all measurements are made with rulers. Some are made with regret. Some are made with hope. If you've ever tried to fix something too late, or built something just in case a heart might return, then you understand the kind of door we're talking about. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, where every cut has meaning. Mr. Puck began tracing the edges, marking the places where the hinges would go. not to lock, but to swing freely. He chose no latch, no knob, only the grain, uninterrupted. As he carved, he thought about all the doors he had made in his life. The ones children had burst through with laughter, the ones slammed in anger, the ones left open on humid nights, letting in both wind and memory. But this was different. What if he never comes back? The man asked. Mr. Fox didn't look up. Then it stays open anyway. There's a kind of beauty in building for someone who may never see it, like writing a letter you never send, or leaving a porch light on for years. If that speaks to something deep in your soul, let this story stay with you. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist and follow the journey of the door that waited. Mr. Fook sanded the edges slowly, not because they needed it, but because it felt like an apology, one stroke at a time. There's something sacred about the first cut. It's not about the chisel or the mallet. It's about the silence that surrounds it. Mr. Fook sat on his low stool, the plank propped up against the sunlit wall, his tools neatly laid beside him like old friends. The stranger wasn't there that morning. He had gone to the river, he said, to think. So it was just Mr. Fook and the wood. As he made the first shallow line down the middle, he whispered, not out loud, but within, "Who are you waiting for?" The grain didn't answer, but it didn't resist. Some woods are stubborn, like bamboo. But jackfruit listens. It opens like memory. Every stroke brought out lines that curved like riverbeds, some straight, some meandering. He wasn't carving patterns. He was carving pauses, moments. A door isn't just a frame. It's a witness to arrivals, departures, words left hanging midair. If you believe that even empty spaces can speak, that a door can remember the weight of someone's footsteps, then you understand what this man was building. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, because here we let the wood tell the story. He worked for hours. No design, just instinct. The top of the door curved gently like an arch welcoming a tired soul. The bottom held a shallow groove, not deep enough to trip, but enough to feel under your toes, as if to say, "You're home." And in the center, without meaning to, his hands carved a single vertical line, soft, imperfect, wavering slightly, like the line between two brothers, or the line we walk between sorrow and grace. That afternoon, the stranger returned. He stood in silence, eyes scanning every detail, but saying nothing. Mr. Fook didn't look up. He only said, "It's listening now." The man blinked. Listening? To you, to him, to whatever needs to pass through. Some pieces of wood don't need nails to hold together. They need truth. If this story is touching something tender inside you, if you've ever wanted to leave a space open for healing, then stay with us. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist. The story isn't finished, and neither is the door. The morning they carried the door uphill, it wasn't the weight that slowed them. It was the silence. Mr. Fook, hunched slightly with age but steady as stone, held one side. The stranger, younger but with a heaviness that had nothing to do with muscle, held the other. There was no blueprint, no finished house waiting for the door to fit into. Just an open patch of land near the edge of the village. Wild grass swaying. A single tree standing crooked like a memory that refused to straighten. "Here," the stranger said softly. "This is where we used to sit, back when we were boys." Mr. Fook nodded once. He began to drive the first 2 wooden posts into the earth, not as walls, but as anchors. No nails, no concrete, just trust in the grain, and in the idea that sometimes you don't need a house to build home. The frame rose slow, like a spine, and when they slid the door into place, it didn't creak. It didn't resist. It stood, proud, quiet, open. A doorway with no roof, no walls, only sky beyond. If you're still with us, then you understand. This isn't about building a house. It's about building a space for something to return. A memory, a person, a chance. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, where we carve stories into places most people forget to look. "Why no walls?" a child from the village asked, watching from a distance. The stranger smiled, eyes damp but clear. "Because walls keep people out. But this," he nodded at the doorway, "this invites them in." That afternoon, a few neighbors passed by. Some paused. One woman left flowers. A teenager touched the frame and whispered a name under his breath. Stories, quiet, wordless, began to gather like wind. Mr. Puck stood back, wiping his hands on his apron. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The door was no longer his. It belonged to every soul who had ever waited for someone, and to every soul who was still finding the courage to walk through. If you've ever built something that says, "I forgive you," without using a single word, then this is your story too. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, because the most beautiful doors are the ones we build without walls. It happened on a Wednesday, one of those late afternoons where the sky glows gold, and the wind seems to carry things older than sound. Mr. Fook had returned to oil the frame, wiping the dust from each joint, his hands moving slowly, like blessing every inch. A few villagers passed by, as they often did now, nodding respectfully. Some paused to touch the wood, not for curiosity, but reverence. And then he appeared, not suddenly, not dramatically, just there. A lean figure in a faded army green jacket, his face worn, not by age, but by distance. His shoes were cracked, his eyes cautious. But what stopped Mr. Puck wasn't how the man looked. It was how still he stood in front of the door, like someone who had finally come home to the one thing that had never asked him to explain. The stranger, the man who commissioned the door, stepped out from the shade of the tree. He froze. His breath caught. "On high," he whispered. The man didn't answer, not with words. He stepped forward, raised his hand, and touched the edge of the doorframe. His fingers trembled, and just like that, the years between them, the silence, the choices, the sorrow, folded inward. One brother had built the door, the other had returned to it. If you believe that reconciliation doesn't need declarations, that sometimes all it takes is a doorway left open long enough, then let this moment settle deep within you. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, where we carve not just wood, but forgiveness. No one spoke for a while. The wind moved through the open space like it had been waiting for this, too. Mr. Pook stood off to the side, quietly packing up his tools. His work was done. Not just the carving, but the part where a craftsman holds space for things to heal. The two brothers sat down beneath the tree, side by side, not touching, not talking. But they were there, together, after all these years, because someone had dared to build a door and believe someone might walk through it. If this story has reached your heart, consider sharing it. And don't forget to subscribe to Wood Carving Artist. The door stays open, and so do we. After the brothers reunited, word spread quickly, not in loud announcements, but in the quiet way stories do in small villages. Within days, people began coming, not to see the brothers, but the door, the one that didn't close, the one that waited. One old woman brought incense sticks and laid them at the base, as if the door was now sacred. A young couple who had lost their baby visited at dusk, holding each other silently, their hands pressed gently against the warm wood. Teenagers came at night, leaving notes folded like secrets tucked into the grooves between the grain. The wood had become something more than a door. It had become prayer, not to a God with a name, but to memory, to forgiveness, to longing. And somehow, that was enough. Mr. Fuck came every other morning to clean the dust and re-oil the frame. He never stayed long, just long enough to nod at whoever had come to visit. He didn't ask questions, didn't need to. The door spoke in a language older than words. If you're still watching, you know. Wood can hold more than shape. It can hold silence, love, and everything we're too afraid to say. That's why here, at Wood Carving Artist, we believe every carving tells a story, even when it says nothing. One afternoon, a child placed a small wooden toy, a carved buffalo, beside the frame. Mr. Fuck smiled gently. That had been his first carving when he was just 8 years old. Maybe the child didn't know. Or maybe he did. Maybe stories, like wood, live longer than we expect. The door began to weather, not rot, but age, and with each crack, it seemed to breathe more, as if it was expanding, not in size, but in meaning. It had become the village's memory keeper, a place where regrets were left, and hope could quietly step in. If you've ever wished for a place to leave your burdens, not to be solved, but simply understood, then let this story be that place. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, because sometimes the most powerful things we create are the ones that never need to be finished. It had been years since Mr. Puck last heard his name spoken with that kind of voice, not formal, not distant, but hesitant, like someone trying to walk barefoot over old memories. Master Fuck? The man was in his 30s, tall, shoulders tense, eyes unsure, but familiar. Min, Mr. Puck said after a moment, his voice soft, more breath than sound. Min had once been his most promising apprentice, until he left. Left the tools, left the craft, left without a word. Now he stood at the edge of the open field, looking at the door as if it might scold him. I heard about this place, Min said, barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure if you'd want me here. Mr. Fuchs didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small brass hinge. One left, he said. It's yours. Min blinked. You want me to finish it? No, Mr. Fuchs said, a small smile beneath his mustache. I want you to remember how. Min knelt beside the frame. His hands shook as he fit the hinge into place. Not for function, but for symbol. A hinge that didn't hold anything shut, but held memory together. The chisel felt different now. He wasn't carving strength. He was carving apology. And Mr. Fook, standing above him, saw what he needed to see. Not perfection, but return. If this story stirs something in your spirit, maybe a teacher you never thanked, a door you never dared to walk through, then let this moment stay with you. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, where every story is carved not just in wood, but in grace. When the hinge was in place, Min looked up, eyes misty. Do you think there's still time for me to learn again? Mr. Fuck nodded. The wood's been waiting. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the door stood a little taller. Not because it was complete, but because it had just begun again. If you've ever wanted to return to something, a dream, a mentor, a purpose, this is your sign. Subscribe to Wood Carving Artist, because sometimes the final hinge isn't about closure. It's about opening again. The rain came gently that night, like a blessing spoken through clouds. The village slept, but the door, that one door on the hill with no house to belong to, stood quietly under the soft drizzle, its wood drinking the memory of every hand that had touched it. Mr. Fook sat on a low stool nearby, beneath a tarp he had stretched between two bamboo poles. He wasn't carving, not tonight, just watching, waiting, listening to the rhythm of water on wood. Min sat beside him, still holding the chisel he had used earlier. Not working, just feeling the tool in his hand like it might teach him something if he stayed quiet long enough. The two brothers had long since gone. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't need to. What was left behind in that door was enough. Mr. Puck finally spoke. You know, doors are strange things. We make them to separate, but also to invite. They keep the cold out, but they also wait for someone to knock. Min looked up, surprised. Do you think this door was meant to wait? Mr. Fuck didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, no. I think it was meant to teach us how. At Wood Carving Artist, we believe every grain of wood holds a story, and every story holds a truth, waiting for the right person to hear it. Maybe this is your story. Maybe this is your door. Subscribe, and let's carve it together. By morning, children would come again. A man with a cane would pause and breathe. A woman would press her forehead to the post and weep. But for now, under the slow, steady rain, the door stood alone. Not lonely, just open. And perhaps that's the most powerful thing we can ever build. Not a wall, not a roof, not even a name. Just a door that waits. If this story reached something deep inside you, a memory, a silence, a dream you've kept tucked away, consider subscribing to Wood Carving Artist. We don't just carve wood, we carve meaning, one open door at a time.